many of those Remain voters in the big cities, the university towns, and increasingly the areas surrounding London in the commuter belt. So what we're seeing here, Lawrence, is essentially a pincer movement that's now taking place. And to put this in context, really the last time the Conservatives have suffered losses on this scale, about 1,000 local councillor losses, more than 40 councils gone, you really need to go back to the pre-New Labour years in the 1990s. So there's no ducking the fact that this is a very bad night for the Conservatives. There are lots of disillusioned voters out there. There are lots of people that are fed up with politics, that are looking at Rishi Sunak, and also, by the way, Sir Keir Starmer, who's not yet in majority territory, and they're just fed up with all of them.
So essentially what we have, what seems like is a Conservative party with it having an identity crisis and a Conservative in name only party. So one would think, logically, that there would be an insurgent party to come into that. But what are the results for Reform UK in these elections, Matt?
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things that's going on here is that on the one hand, if you ask 2019 Conservative voters, look, why have you switched from the party or why haven't you voted at all? The first issue they say is cost of living, the second is immigration. So there's definitely a lot of space in British politics for parties that are taking the Conservatives on those issues. I think the problem, particularly for Reform at the moment, is that lots of voters don't really know what Reform is. Lots of voters don't really know who the leader is. They've not got that visibility that you did have, for example, in the era of Nigel Farage. There's also, I think, a general sense of exasperation and disillusionment with the country after more than 10 years of Conservative rule. I think people have been worn down by many of the things that they've experienced with public services and so on. So I think underlying all of this is a general sense of apathy. And you can see that in the Labour performance. I mean, look, no matter what Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are saying today, the blunt reality is that they don't yet have the numbers to get into majority power. They're a little bit short. They're about 9 points ahead in the national vote. They really need to be 12, 13 points ahead to be comfortably in majority territory. And that's despite everything that they've had: inflation, the small votes crisis, Partygate, Trussonomics. There is still something that isn't connecting between the Labour Party and much of the country. And I suspect many people watching this show would probably share that sense that, Keir Starmer seems like he's more competent than Jeremy Corbyn, but they don't yet feel that there's a positive endorsement or a real enthusiasm for the opposition. So we're in this state of affairs, a sort of interregnum, if you like, where we're waiting for new things to emerge and we're watching old things struggle. And I think that's where we are at the moment in British politics.
That's very interesting. Do you think that there's a sense among the voting public that you vote Labour or Conservative and you're just voting for alternate cheeks of the same backside?
Well, there's not really that much between them. I mean, if you look at the new consensus in British politics at the moment, what is it? It's comfortable with large-scale immigration, talking about a big state, throwing more money at public services, not talking that much about reforming public services. There's not really that much between Labour and the Conservatives when it comes to economic strategy, industrial policy, education. I mean, the differences are fairly small compared to earlier periods in British politics. And I think when you look at those 2019 Conservatives, Lawrence, a lot of those voters were, hard workers, technicians, electricians, plumbers, had often not passed through the universities, working class. Those are the voters that have really abandoned the Conservatives in those northern areas. And what do they want? They want less immigration. They want Brexit to be much more than it's currently envisaged to be. They don't want this London-centric economy. They don't want this sort of new elite in the country lecturing them about all of these identity issues. And I think fundamentally the Conservatives have failed to deliver for that group. So because they've not made any choices, they've not taken really any tough decisions about what they are as a party, they're now being hammered on both flanks. They're losing those areas in the south and they're losing these areas in the north. And that's not a sustainable position. I mean, this is going to be a very difficult general election for Rishi Sunak unless something changes and changes quickly.
So are Labour going to win the next general election, do you think? And does Rishi Sunak have to call it immediately or within the next year?
Well, I imagine Sunak's going to push it back as late as he can, probably to November 24. If you take all the numbers that we've got from these local elections, Lawrence, and you applied them to a general election, and obviously take this with a pinch of salt because things change, inflation will come down, we will see the economic environment change over the next year. But what you'd be looking at is a Labour minority government or a Labour-led coalition, some kind of hung parliament territory. And of course, with the Conservatives, it's majority or bust. Nobody's going to work with the Conservatives like we saw in 2017 and so on. So I think what we're heading towards currently is a messy hung parliament, but with Labour as the largest party. And Rishi Sunak will be hoping he can change that and change that quickly over the next year. But as I say, I mean, you look at the immigration estimates, you look at how stubborn inflation is, you look at the NHS and the scale of the backlog. Are voters going to be feeling meaningful differences over the next 12 months? I mean, I'm increasingly pessimistic about the Conservative Party's chances, but that's because I think they failed to respond to the moment that they've had since the Brexit referendum. I just don't think they really know what they are anymore, and I don't think they know how to hold these voters that they've got, and this is now reflected in these local election results.
Absolutely, Matt. One would just posit that maybe the Conservatives tried being Conservative. That would be a good start. Anyway, Professor of Politics and International Relations, University Professor of Kent, Matt Goodwin. Have a great coronation weekend, sir.
You too.
Right. I think, if he's there, is he there? Mark, get in. Sit down on this weird giant chair, which can make you even bigger than me.
Hi, Telly. Listen, I've loved the coverage. We need to get me mic'd up because otherwise they won't hear my words of wisdom. So you do a little mini monologue while we get mic'd up.
On this day, I'm with Mark Dolan, who one day I hope to emulate, to be as tall as, to be as handsome as and to have 3 hours of television to share with. You can't hear Mark, so I'm going to speak for him. Mark, how are you enjoying the coronation weekend? Lawrence, your work has made this coronation weekend the most wonderful experience of my life. Can someone stick a microphone on Mark, please? I'm not touching the mic. Oh, that's right, that cuss in my ear. Anyway, as you can see, here at GB News, we're always very careful. We get everyone mic'd up before they turn up and all this stuff. Anyway, Mark is on for the next 3 hours. I was actually very interested in what Matt Goodwin was saying because we are looking at 700,000 migration into this country this year, and any Conservative government would see that as a huge betrayal of their electorate when people are waiting to get doctors' appointments and operations, and the NHS is in the state it is in. So no wonder they got hammered in the elections. I am surprised and actually disappointed and upset that Reform, who stood 500 candidates, didn't get more of a showing, and it just goes to show that we are turning into America with the Republicans and Democrats. I think he has a microphone on.
That was one of your best ever soliloquies, I've got to say. That was a career highlight. And thank you for the proposal of marriage. I will say yes, because I've heard you got money. Now, listen, we've got to understand that these were the local elections, OK? This is a shot across the bows to the Tories. I don't disagree with anything you said. Millions of our viewers and listeners feel let down by this so-called Conservative government who are anything but. However, we now live in a 24-hour news cycle. Everything is about image. It's about the photo op. And the most telegenic politician of his generation is Rishi Sunak. If it's a choice between Sunak and Starmer, it's going to be Sunak all day long, and that is a decision that the public will make, and they will hold their nose to do it. But they don't want another Labour government.
He is handsome, Rishi, and he does ooze kind of, I'm with you guys, I'm really enthusiastic about the whole game.
Well, yes, I mean, I don't want to drop names, but I was just chatting to my friend Nigel Farage before we went on air, and he pointed out that actually when the talk of the Tories losing 1,000 seats is an understatement, because that's based upon a terrible performance in 2019. So really, they're minus, times 100. But the issue is that, yes, they've lost their council footprint, but in a general election, the public have to ask themselves, is Keir Starmer the guy that's going to stand up to the striking unions when Labour rely on income from the unions to keep themselves afloat? Is Starmer going to stand up to woke ideology when he can't define what a woman is? The list goes on. So I just think shares in Sunak are very low at the moment, and I would say bye, bye, bye.
And shares in Starmer are even lower, almost.
Well, I mean, I don't think it would be...
Why didn't Reform score? Why don't people vote for these insurgent parties? Tell me.
Well, it's a huge problem, and, I'm undecided about whether we should have proportional representation, but at the moment, we first past the post, a vote for any of these smaller parties that have a lot to commend them is a wasted vote, and that's how the public see it.
At least he's got a bank account. The government won't let me have one. Anyway, I would just like to say thank you so much for joining me. It's actually a real privilege and a pleasure to walk down through this thing, walk past him, Davey, give him an elbow and ask him why he's trying to stop everybody watching the footage, and to sit with my hero of broadcasting, Mark Dolan, and to talk to you. What is a historic day coming tomorrow? Whatever you feel about the coronation, I know what I feel about coronation. I've tried my absolute best to yes it up, but I do think my lines about the loss of the Titanic and all the optimism that came with that may prove to be prophetic. I wish our King God's prayers, and thank you very, very much for joining me this evening. Stick around for Mark. Goodbye.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie Shuttleworth from the Met Office. Now, it's going to be a pretty unsettled weekend for the coronation across the UK, and that's because low pressure is still in charge. It's been dragging these fronts northwards across the UK. Now, through Friday night, we'll see some respite. However, the southwest will start to see the next batch of rain by the early hours. So for many, it'll be a drier night than we've had throughout the day, but there will be a lot of cloud around, particularly across northeastern areas of Scotland, where it'll be quite misty and murky well into Saturday morning. With all that cloud around, it'll be a mild night across the UK, lows of around 8 or 9 degrees. So a pretty mild start to the weekend, but rain will soon start to arrive into the southwest, bringing outbreaks of rain for much of the day here. Now, it'll be a drier start to the day across northern England and into parts of Scotland, but notice showers breaking out, and these look quite bright and therefore heavy into the afternoon, so quite an unsettled afternoon. However, in any sunshine, it's going to feel pretty warm, highs of around 18 or 19 degrees in northwestern areas. Now, that area of rain will linger across the Midlands and then into southeastern areas through Saturday evening and overnight, bringing with it a lot of low cloud. So quite a dull and misty night across the UK on Saturday night, with some outbreaks of quite heavy rain persisting in the southeast. But again, it'll be another mild night, temperatures well above average for the time of year. So a dull and misty start to Sunday, but by and large, Sunday will turn out to be the better day of the weekend. However, we will see some outbreaks of heavy showers starting to develop across the southeast. So as we head through Sunday and then into Monday, we continue to see the risk of heavier showers with the best of the sunshine across the west. I'll see you later.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
The Tubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel. Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
Yeah, that's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bang.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Coronation Eve and the countdown to the biggest constitutional event of the century so far. On Mark Dolan Tonight, in a special 3-hour show live from Buckingham Palace, we've got the pundits, the royal experts, the journalists and the biographers. And we've got you, the great British public, for what will be 3 hours of anticipation, excitement and celebration. It's the party of the year, so bring a bottle and maybe a flag, and I'll see you after the headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Good evening, I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Labour Party has made significant gains in the local elections in England and is now the largest party at local government level. With just 8 out of 230 councils still left to declare their results, Labour has so far gained control of 21, while the Liberal Democrats have gained 11. The Conservative Party has lost control of 45 councils and more than 1,000 seats. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has admitted the results are disappointing.
The message I am hearing from people tonight is that they want us to focus on their priorities and they want us to deliver for them. And that's about halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the votes. That's what people care about, that's what they want us to deliver, and that's what I and the government are going to work very hard to do.
Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer believes the Labour Party is on track to win a majority in the next general election.
We've just taken Medway for the first time since 1998. That is a very, very good night for the Labour Party. And it's the same story elsewhere. Same story in Plymouth, in Stoke, up in Middlesbrough. These are the key battle grounds as we go into the next election.
And the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, said the Conservatives should be worried.
These are some of our best ever results. They give us a great foundation for the next general election. There'll be Conservative MPs across the blue wall seats, across many of these areas, who will be really, really worried now that the Liberal Democrats could beat them at the next general election.
The top news story this evening. On the eve of the King's coronation, the King and the Prince and Princess of Wales have greeted well-wishers on the Mall. King Charles made a surprise appearance to meet with some of the thousands gathered outside Buckingham Palace. William and Kate joined the King for the walkabout. They praised the party atmosphere on the Mall and described the coronation as a great moment of celebration. The trio shook hands and took selfies with the crowds, and there were cheers of God Save the King. The royalists who've been camping out hoping to catch a glimpse of history being made this weekend have described it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
We were literally just walking back to the hotel, and then we just saw everybody cheering and came over, and then saw the King, and I got a shake of the hand. I got through the crowd, and I got a shake of the hand.
I think this is Britain at its best, you know. Everybody's nattering to everybody, there's no stiff upper lip, it's just lovely.
We just wanted to be a part of history and enjoy the you know, nobody does it better than the British, so we wanted to see all the excitement and be a part of it.
In other news, the World Health Organization has announced that COVID-19 no longer represents a global health emergency. It's a step towards the end of a pandemic that has killed nearly 7 million people globally. But the director insisted countries shouldn't let down their guard, warning the virus is here to stay. You're up to date on GB News. Now let's get back to Mark.
It's Coronation Eve and the countdown to the biggest constitutional moment of the century so far. On Mark Dolan tonight, in a special 3-hour show live from Buckingham Palace, we've got the pundits, the royal experts, the journalists and the biographers. And we've got you, the great British public, for what is a night of anticipation, excitement and celebration. In my big opinion, my appraisal of our new monarch, is he up to the job? I'll be giving my unapologetic verdict shortly. In my take at 10, I'll be making the case for Queen Camilla. It's my view that she will be the jewel in the crown of this new monarchy. We'll be joined by Britain's most feared and revered royal biographer, Tom Bower, Prince Andrew's best mate, socialite and dropper of truth bombs, Lady Victoria Hervey, former national newspaper editor and the First Lady of Fleet Street, Eve Pollard, Diana's former bodyguard, Ken Worf, the Queen of US showbiz and royal reporting, Kinsey Schofield, a man who knows the royals better than they know themselves, Diana's former butler, Paul Burrell, plus ex-military man Ben Abazi-Jekti, historian David Oldroyd Bolt, and ex-royal journalist Linda Jubilee. It's a cast of thousands, and they're all live with me here at the Palace. Now, look, I want to hear from you throughout the show. Mark at gbnews.uk. This hour we'll be asking, will being king change Charles? Has the job come too late for our new king? And will the coronation unite the United Kingdom? You won't want to miss a second of the action. We've got ringside seats. Let's go. And kicking off the pre-match action is revered and feared biographer Tom Bauer, who is the author of Rebel King, The Making of a Monarch, which I've just finished. An absolute page-turner. Tom, welcome to the Palace.
Thank you.
Good to see you. First of all, I just saw Charles go by a couple of hours ago. He gave me a little wave, I think. Probably a GB News fan. Does he want this?
Oh, he wants it desperately. He's wanted it so much. And to his misfortune, his parents, there was a dinner for Prince Philip in his 95th birthday at Travellers. And someone said, will Charles be a good king? And his father said to his hosts, the only reason the Queen and I continue to live is to prevent Charles becoming king. And that was the barrier to him becoming the monarch. So he wants it badly. He's now freed from his parents' supervision, so to speak, and that's gone. I think the legacy of Diana is finally being extinguished, or he will try his hardest to extinguish it. So he's finally got to where he wanted to be probably 20 years ago.
Is there some bitterness in his heart that it's come this late?
Well, it's very hard to say bitterness because, after all, he had to wait for his mother to die. I think that he would have, because he's a sort of passionate historian in many ways, he would have liked to have come to the throne earlier, so there would be a long Carillion era, so there would be some sort of historical legacy, which he's now going to try to cram in. Except I think he's a bit too tired for it, a bit too old, to actually impose himself the same way as his mother did.
Does he deserve to be king?
Well, I'm a monarchist, and therefore I think the hereditary principle should run. But I don't think that he's going to be the sort of person who can unite Britain as his mother did. I think he's been far too controversial, far too difficult. There's far too much of a footprint and a legacy over these last 50 years of all his campaigns and all the people who he really insulted to actually warm the British public towards him. But I think the majority of Britons do want a monarchy, and they'll tolerate him rather than love him.
As Prince of Wales, he lived in the shadow of Princess Diana. Will he live in the shadow of his son, Prince William, and his daughter-in-law, Kate, when he is finally coronated tomorrow?
Well, I don't think it'll be so much a shadow, but he relies on them desperately, because in the end, the polls have all shown that the young people and diverse community in Britain is pretty Republican, pretty anti-monarchy, and William could win those people over. I think Charles is far too old and set in his ways to win them over. And of course, he lives with a terrible legacy now of Meghan saying that the royal family is racist, which is a complete calumny, completely untrue. But he arrived on the throne with so many minuses that it's hard to see that he can shine except through William and Kate, who are remarkably popular and rightly popular. And to some extent, it is in a way a shame that we don't go straight from the Queen to William and Kate, because they would have really given the monarchy huge amount of vigour.
Might they be the joint elephants in the room as the king ages, with the public thinking, come on, Charles, make way for these two?
Well, I think time will tell. I think abdication in the grounds of old age is unlikely. What's very interesting is...
And the Queen set that precedent.
Exactly. But what's interesting is, and no one wanted the Queen to abdicate, that's the point. But I think what's interesting is how Kate and William are constantly pushed forward by the palace because they realise that Charles cannot actually win over people. And I think he himself knows that. I mean, he's not a populist. He's a passionate person about all his interests, but he isn't someone of the people, although he tries hard. And actually, when he meets the people, on the whole, people who meet him like him very much because he's very interested in people and he cares for their problems.
So you think he's interested in people, but you don't think he's got the common touch?
Well, not only does he have the common touch, but he doesn't want to be common, and he doesn't want to be in touch. Yeah. He's a sort of very perfectionist who's very sort of hypochondriac and awfully careful about where he goes. But on the other hand, he's a man of 74.
Yeah.
And his wife is not in the best of health, I don't think, and so it's very difficult for them to have the energy to engage with young people, which Kate and William can do.
Now, why are you not a little harsh on the king in terms of his energy? Because many people would suggest that there are parallels with Donald Trump, again, a man well into his mid-70s who has unending energy. And don't you think Charles is of the same ilk? Well, this is a famous workaholic, a guy who falls asleep in the dead of night reading his letters.
Absolutely, and writing his letters, absolutely. And I think he has that sort of energy, and I think he has energy when he goes on his walkabouts and visits people. But there's a limit to how much he can do. I mean, the limit is he works perhaps 6 months of the year, and the rest of it is spent in Balmoral or Highgrove or Sandringham or somewhere else. And I think that he can't do it full time. And nor does he.
Do you think he'd like an early night tonight, for example?
I think tonight he'll do his normal routine. He'll have one martini, he'll have a second martini, he'll be enormously excited. After all this, tomorrow, he's been preparing this for 20 years, been going through all the books, all the old manuscripts to see how a coronation should be organised. He's orchestrated it to perfection. He's going to see his theatre, his play, his performance tomorrow played out.
We could easily do an hour on your fantastic book, Rebel King. I won't plug it too much because you've had plenty of sales already, but I would recommend it. Here's a quote from the book. By relying on sycophants, willing to tolerate his tirades and his rejection of any criticism, Charles has made damaging mistakes. His grudges and disloyalty have deprived him of wise advisors.
Yes.
So what do you think about his inner circle right now, and will they show him the way?
Well, I think what happened was that book, if I may be so modest, changed Charles dramatically, because the source of that particular paragraph, as many others, were people who'd worked for him and were outraged by his behaviour. and most important of all, were fed up that he hadn't sent them a Christmas card after he fired them. That seemed to play heavily.
Because he does quite a disloyal figure in this book.
Very disloyal.
He's a decent guy, but he's not really got your back.
Well, he not only has your back, he'll stab you in the chest if you said no to him. And that is what weakened him as Prince of Wales, that he wouldn't listen to good advice. I think that he's changed. He's listening to advice now because he has no alternative.
Has the missus changed him? We know he's domestically happy now, but has Camilla influenced Charles?
Oh, of course. There's no doubt that he's much happier.
But women don't have that power over men, do they?
Oh, absolutely. Well, then you haven't met the right women.
Let me tell you, my house is not a democracy.
Exactly. No, I mean, Camilla is one of those wonderfully country, sensible women, take no nonsense, take no quarter, and play it hard when it's necessary, and give love also when it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And she's given him enormous support. But always remember about Camilla, I know you think that her great love was not Charles, her great love was Andrew Parker Bowles.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't have dreamt of marrying Charles at that moment, and she wouldn't be married to him now if Andrew Parker Bowles had been a faithful husband.
Well, there you go. On that bombshell, more to come from Tom Bauer. Also, Fleet Street legend